Been sleeping for too long. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up! Wake up! I see the sunshine gazing through the window pane. Blazing like endo flame, it's time to wake up. Come to your senses, man. Snow is all around you, but you don't play in the winter game. Cartridges surround you, but you ain't playing Nintendo games.
And we are back. Welcome to the Woke Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Jones. And on today's episode, we are going to discuss grief. That is right, grief. And what is grief? And why is this guy talking about it on this podcast? One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about grief now was Tommy from Martin died. Tommy Ford passed away today at the age of 52. And I think that's pretty messed up. I mean, we've lost a lot of notable Black people this year. I mean, we lose people every year, but this year, 2016, we have lost a lot of notable people, a lot of icons, and a lot of, common folks, people that we don't know their names as well. And I think our existence as Black people carries a lot of grief. And grief is a topic that I discuss when I do groups, when I do psychoeducational groups, is grief and what it is, and why it's important that we understand what grief is. Most people, when they think of grief, they think of when someone dies, but grief isn't just about death. It's not just about death. Grief really is about significant loss. Significant loss. And my definition for grief is how we process significant loss. So we end up losing something significant to us, and we have to deal with it a certain type of way, right? And the significant thing can be a person. It can be time. It can be a connection. And it can be an opportunity. Yeah, we can grieve over losing opportunities. So let me repeat that. We can grieve over losing a loved one, a person, someone that we care deeply about, someone that's impacted our life. We can grieve over a loss of time. We can grieve over connection, losing a connection, like moving from one state to another state, leaving a very significant home or place you used to live. In my family, when my great-grandparents passed away, the family sold their home, and their home was really like it was really like the core of our family. And once that home was sold, our family split in like 4 different kind of subgroups. And I think we were all going through our own grieving process when that house was sold, but it also caused a huge separation, and that house really kept us together. So my entire family went through a whole grieving kind of situation, and we haven't recovered from that. I mean, we're still split in kind of separate camps after that home was sold and our great-grandparents passed away. And we also grieve over opportunities. And this is one that I think that we don't think about a lot. But, this is when people get into that coulda, woulda, shoulda mindset. Like, dang, man, I really wish that I would have did X, Y, Z. Or if I could go back in time, I would do this and that. Or if I had one more chance with her, if I had one more chance with him, I would have did this right. And that's part of grieving. You are realizing that you lost something, and that you would have done something better to prevent the outcome that actually happened. That is a process of grief, And grief is not an easy thing to deal with. Some people grieve for a long time. Some people don't have the skills or the tools or do enough work to process through their grief, and they end up internalizing a lot of that pain, and that can be very dangerous for people. So one of the most common things that people talk about is the 5 steps of grief, and I'm going to briefly go over those with you now. So the 5 steps or stages of grief is something that is utilized a lot in psychology. It's pretty well known. If you just type in 5 stages of grief, you'll pull up tons of information on Google. And those 5 stages or steps, I'm going to say stages because steps, it doesn't always happen in this order. So the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. And, when I learned about this, I felt like people can jump around in some of these steps. I feel like depending on what's happening, or what skills and what coping skills and strategies you have, it can really determine like where you're at, right? And especially also the context of the situation. So, if you grew up like me in the hood, and someone that you knew that you cared about, let's say a sibling, was murdered by a police officer, no, let's just say they were murdered by a local gang member. or Minnesota, we have cliques, we don't really have gangs. So they were murdered by somebody that was in the streets. Was living that street life. Like, it might be very hard for you to accept that, especially if you live in the neighborhood. You see this person's family or this person's clique or gang is still around. It might be hard for you to reach that level of acceptance, right? You might stay in that place of anger, or you might slip into that place of depression. So I don't necessarily believe that everyone goes through these steps or stages, chronologically. I don't think that happens. I think that we find ourselves in these places, and we need to develop skills and different ways to cope so that we don't stay in these places, so we can move forward our lives. So let's break these stages down. So let's talk about denial. Denial, that's usually the first step. So something happens, boom, let's say your dog dies. So, your dog buddy, we call your dog buddy. Your dog buddy, you've had this dog since you were a child. The dog has been a huge part of the family. It's in family photos. It's all good. And then one day you go outside and Buddy is laid out in the middle of the street. So Buddy got hit by a car. Buddy dead. Buddy dead. He gone. Buddy's gone. And you might be in denial, you or your parents or whomever have to call, animal control to come clean up your dead dog. Or maybe, you bought that life, so you just take the dog and bury it in the backyard. And you try to go on with your day, but you struggle. And then the next day you wake up and you expect Buddy to be there. You expect Buddy to come in your room. You expect to feed Buddy and pet Buddy before you go do what you need to do. When you're in denial, and this happens day after day after day, because you're refusing to accept the facts that Buddy has died, right? So that's denial, right? So you're ignoring that change has happened, that Buddy is no longer with you. You're denying that. And that's usually the first stage of grief, is denial, not believing what has happened has actually happened. The facts that this person is no longer here, or in this case, Buddy is no longer here. And then that usually leads into anger, right? So that's the flow. It's supposed to go to anger. So now that you kind of recognize and you come to your senses a little bit that Buddy has died. Buddy was hit by a car. We don't know who hit Buddy. Buddy was just laid out. You found him in the morning in the middle of the street. You get pissed. You get mad. You're like, what the fuck happened to Buddy? Like, what happened to my dog? What happened to my dog? Right? So then you get angry. So you might get upset with yourself. Like, man, I knew I should have closed the gate last night. Why wasn't I paying more attention? I should have checked the door so the dog didn't get out. It's my fault. You start blaming yourself for why Buddy died. And it might not necessarily be your fault at all. Buddy might have popped the gate open itself. Buddy might have, found his own way out into the middle of the street to get hit by a car. But a lot of times people blame themselves for what has happened, right? Or you might get upset with other people. So you might blame your family members. Like, why didn't they check to see if Buddy was okay? And nobody was paying attention to the dog. And why did I have to find the dog laid out in the middle of the street? Nobody else was paying attention. Nobody else, when they woke up, they didn't notice that Buddy was dead, that Buddy wasn't there. Like, no one else seen this. So you might start being upset at other people around you for what has happened, even though it might not necessarily be their fault either. So that's stage 2. Stage 2 is anger. The third stage, and sometimes the third and the fourth stage kind of get shifted around. So if you go do your own research, you might see these in 2 different places. But usually the third stage is bargaining. And bargaining is when you start negotiating with a higher power, right? So whatever higher power, if you believe in a higher power, right? You start saying, God, Why did you take Buddy? Buddy didn't do anything wrong to anybody. Buddy was the best dog ever. You know, he was the only pet that I grew strong emotions for. Buddy did not deserve this. Why? Why would this happen to Buddy? So you're bargaining. Take me instead, right? You know, Buddy didn't deserve this. Why didn't it hit the neighbor's dog? That dog's always barking and, you know, peeing and pooping in our yard. Like, why that dog couldn't get hit? Why did it have to be Buddy? So you're bargaining with the higher power. You're trying to, you know, replace yourself with what happened, or replace what happened, the facts, with something else to make yourself feel good and to make yourself feel more comfortable with the reality of the situation, right? So you start making deals with yourself. Or you even start making deals with your higher power or with yourself, right? So at this point, when you're trying to make a deal with yourself, is I'll never do this again. If you just, you know, if you could bring Buddy back. So we're still living in non-reality and wishing and hoping, you know, if anything could happen, if we could just bring Buddy back, I promise I'll make sure that I feed the dog all the time. I'll keep the gate locked. I'll check on it every night. If we could just bring Buddy back, please just bring Buddy back. Bring Buddy. Buddy did not deserve this, right? And that's not realistic, right? So that Buddy is gone. Buddy has died. We have buried Buddy in the backyard, you know, or animal control came and picked up Buddy. Buddy's no longer with us. And it's tough for people to deal with that, which leads into depression, stage 4, depression. So now this is when reality really starts to set in, and you realize Buddy is gone. Buddy is not coming back. Buddy got hit. We don't know who hit Buddy. That makes us sad because we don't have any answers. We don't know. We don't have any facts. We don't have any information. All we know is Buddy was hit by a car and Buddy was laying there. We don't know how long Buddy was laying there. We don't know if Buddy suffered, or we don't know if he died instantly. It's very sad. So then you start to have a lot of sadness and regret. You start to, you know, regret the fact that you live where you live. Why do we even move here? You know, you regret the fact that, you know, that gate that should have got fixed before, but we never fixed the latch on the gate. You start regretting that you didn't change that latch on the gate. You know, you start regretting that you let Buddy go out in the nighttime to use the bathroom instead of taking him for a walk before everything shut down, and you went to bed. You start to have a lot of sadness and regret, right? And then another thing comes with the depression is fear and uncertainty, right? So you have a lot of fear. What if that person who hit my dog, what if I get another dog and they hit this dog? I'm uncertain if I even feel safe now. Maybe I might get hit by a car, right? We start thinking of all different types of things that can happen, different stages of, you know, potential threat or potential danger might come up. And it might not necessarily be true. However, since we went through this pain point, we start to come up with various different possibilities that can happen, and that's not healthy for us, and we kind of slip into depression. So, you know, we have a lot of different thoughts that might not be true, some, you know, irregular sadness, some self-blame and regret, some fear, some uncertainty, and we just kind of stay in this emotional state that's unhealthy for us. And then at some point in time, the goal is to get to level 5 or stage 5, which is acceptance. Right? So we stop struggling to resist the facts that Buddy has passed. Buddy was hit by a car. Buddy's dead. We might create an emotional detachment from Buddy. You know, he was our dog. We have pictures of him. We remember him. And, you know, it's sad when we think of when we first got him, or that time where he did that really cute thing on Christmas morning, or whatever the case may be. And then we kind of go into acceptance. And acceptance is hard. It's not easy to accept that you have lost something very significant to you. It's probably one of the most difficult stages there is to come to grips with Buddy is never going to return. You know, you might get another dog. You might name that dog Buddy. You know, you might keep the dog's collar, you know, or the dog's tag in remembrance of Buddy. But he's gone, and you have to kind of accept the fact that that has happened, and you have to move forward. And that's not easy. It's not easy to accept wrongdoing. It's not easy to accept pain. It's not easy to accept that something happened that shouldn't have happened, and you had to live with it. And this is one of the most difficult things that we, as Black people, have to live with. We live in a society that does not treat us very well. on multiple levels. And a lot of times we have to accept that grief that our ancestors, our family members have been through a lot of pain for us to do the things and have the lives that we have now. And those lives are still not respected. Those lives still aren't fulfilled to their level that they can be. And, those lives are still filled with struggle. And that's a huge part to accept as well. And one of the things that I talk a lot about when I work with people and we're talking about culture, which what we did on the last podcast, is that our culture has a lot of grief infused in it, what we lost. That's why we have a lot of the things that we do now. From a couple years ago was the big chop. A lot of sisters were going natural, and that was a beautiful thing. And one of the driving forces that didn't get talked about with that was the grief around not having our connection to our natural hairs and how we've been conditioned to utilize perms and change our hair. Now, I'm not here to tell women what to do with their hair, period. That is not my goal. That is not my role. But I am here to recognize that there was a point of loss with how we identified ourselves and our hair. And that has led to what we see now with, natural hair care products, all different types of natural. We have this resurgence of, wearing our natural hair. And that's because we lost something culturally about just having our hair how it is and just accepting it. And that's, part of that's because we were, assimilated by force to be someone else's culture. And when we do that, we start to emulate them. But that's grief. When you lose that piece of your culture, that piece of your identity, you go through a grieving process, and we start bargaining, right? We had to bargain with the culture that we were in. And that led some people to depression. The big chop was a huge emotional release for a lot of women. Go on YouTube and check some of them videos from a couple of years ago. I mean, there's people still doing the big chop, but that was an emotional toll for a lot of black women. I mean, cutting your hair off is a huge thing. Like that led up. I mean, I seen sisters crying. I knew sisters in my personal life that did the big chop. It was like a big deal. And part of that is grief. That's an emotional attachment we have to our identity that was stripped to us, and we had to run through that, right? Some people, they get angry and do the big chop. As a clinician, as a mental health provider, if I have a client with a lot of hair, typically it's a female client, but it can be a male too. And, 1 week you see them and they have, their typical hairstyle. And the next week they come to session, or the next 2 weeks they come to session and they shave their head. That's a big warning sign. Like, whoa, what happened? Like, why did you shave your head? Like, as a clinician, I'm very curious to know what happened for you to shave your head. So, it could have been out of anger. It could have been out of frustration. It could have been because they wanted to do the big chop. It could have been a lot of different things. But usually that has a huge emotional toll, right? So we have to understand that grief plays itself out in various different ways in our lives. Another thing that I see with grief with a lot of black adolescents is when they relocate. So I talked about this in previous podcasts, but in the state of Minnesota, this is kind of a destination location for black folks who are coming here for jobs and other financial opportunities. So we get a lot of people that weren't born here. And when they leave there, a lot of the clients that I have that are from different places, they usually left when they were pretty young, 6, 7, 8 years old. They've come from Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Jackson, Mississippi, pretty much a lot of Midwestern around the Mississippi River places. When they come here, they go through a lot of grieving periods, and it's a huge adjustment for a lot of young people because they're usually leaving a bigger city. They're usually leaving the hood where they see mostly black folks, and then they're coming to Minnesota where most of the time you're going to see a lot of white people. I mean, it's just going to happen. And it's a culture shift, and it's an adjustment. And a lot of young people grieve, and their parents don't recognize that. The parents are just saying, we're going up here because it's going to be a better life, and we're going to be able to live better than we are down here, wherever we're at. And it's going to be fine. But the kids go through grief because they're leaving their friends. They're leaving their comfort zone. They're leaving their neighborhood. They knew the person at the corner store, they knew who to talk to and who not to talk to. And then all of a sudden, they come here to Minnesota and they have to restart, and they're 8 years old and they don't know how to deal with that information. They don't know how to process that. So they go through grief. And a lot of the young people that I come in contact with, they get angry. it's no denial. They just go straight to the anger because they're frustrated. And as we know, young people, they, for the most part, they can't articulate their emotions, so they act them out. And a lot of times when young people act out their emotions, it ends up in anger. That's grief in itself, that loss. And another level to that, and I have several clients like this too, is when one of the parents is leaving the other parent behind. So mom's like, all right, I'm taking the kids and I'm gone, and they're gonna leave dad behind. That's another grief. So now, not only did you move to another state, but you left your dad behind. Like, your father is here, and now your family's split up. So now you're grieving because that level of comfort, that world that you knew, has been stripped in more than one way. And now you have to figure out how to deal with this new life in this new world, in this new space. And that causes a lot of grief and anxiety for a lot of young people. So grief is something that we have to be honest about and real about. And I'm very interested to hear, different things that you've grieved over, different things that you've dealt with in your life. And feel free to hit me up, at the Woke Podcast on Twitter. Let me know, how have you grieved? How have you grieved? Who taught you how to grieve? That's a whole nother thing. Like, who taught us how to grieve? Especially when I think about deaths and funerals. No one ever really explained much to the young kids. No one, you just had to go sit in a room with your cousins and everybody go here, and, all the adults, they go eating and drinking and talking, but nobody really processes the grief with the young people, right? We sweep a lot of things on the rug. We tell them half truths and don't give them enough information. And then as a young person, you're just stuck trying to put pieces together that, aren't really done well. So we don't really process our grief well as a culture, as a community. We don't process our grief well. And I think having some level of focus or some level of practice of how to grieve in a constructive and healthy way will be helpful. Here are a few ways that I suggest coping with your grief. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that everyone grieves differently. Even though you may find yourself on one of those stages of grief, the impact of the loss may be different for different people. So make sure that whatever coping mechanism you use is constructive. One of the things that I've noticed with Black folks is that it's very easy for us to slip into non-constructive ways to cope with our grief, our pain, our trauma, and our stress, because those vices and those things are so easily accessed, whether we're talking about violence, alcohol, chemical dependency, using drugs, whether we're talking about just, tons of amounts of escapism, watching a lot of TV, sex, food, not sleeping. Like those things can be, and often are, very non-constructive if we abuse those things, and it happens pretty often. So make sure that if you decide that one of these suggestions that I give you may work for you, test it out and give yourself a chance with it before you slide into one of the more non-constructive things. So these are some constructive coping skills that I have suggested to clients and I have used myself from time to time. So number one, of course, I'm biased. Find support. So whether that's professional help or whether that is someone that you trust, someone that you care about, someone that you are okay with connecting with and sharing your pain and your hurt with, make sure this is someone that you trust, though. I wouldn't go blasting it out on social media that you're hurt and that you're in pain, because a lot of times that might lead into a lot of miscommunication, and people might like your status, or they might, retweet you, or whatever the case may be. They might inbox you and let you know if they care, but they might honestly just be doing that because you posted it. So make sure that it's something that's more genuine than just posting it. And I'm never going to be the person to tell you not to post something, but be very careful what you post on social media. But find that support, find that genuine support. The next thing I would say is express yourself in creative ways. A lot of great things have come from pain. It's kind of a weird element in human life, but we get a lot of good music from when people go through crazy divorces and breakups. We see a lot of good artwork. We see a lot of good work, period. A lot of creative ideas. A lot of inventions are happening when people are going through stuff and they're really struggling. So find your creative outlet. What do you like to do, or what have you not tried but you might think that you're good at, or you always were just kind of intrigued on? Find a creative outlet. The next thing would be take care of your physical health, and this is one that I think a lot of people struggle with, myself included. Figure out, go work out, go for a walk, do some mindfulness or breathing meditations. Just go outside and just take 10 minutes and breathe in some fresh air. Taking care of your physical health. You don't have to go and get a gym membership and, go hard in the paint at the gym, go do 1,000 squats, go kill yourself on the stairs for 35 minutes. You don't got to go do all that. But if that's that's how you get down, definitely hit the gym, but just take care of your physical health. Go for some walks, go get a jump rope, do some jump roping, do some push-ups, stretch. Stretching is always good. That's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. Stretch, bust out a yoga mat, do some yoga if that's how you get down, but take care of your physical health. The next thing is allow yourself some time. We don't give ourselves time to deal with our stuff, right? We don't want to dwell on things for too long, but give yourself enough time to actually process it. Don't feel like you need to get over, buddy dying. We'll just keep using the dog example. Don't think you need to get over your dog dying in 3 days. It might take 3 months. It might take 3 years. It might take 3 weeks. Give yourself the right amount of time, but just don't let it be forever. The next thing that I suggest you do is cry. It is okay to cry. We talked about, black men and their mental health last podcast, but it's okay to cry. It's okay to let it out. You need that physical, emotional release, and crying is all right. But be wary. You don't want to just continuously cry, right? So we don't want to overdo it, but make sure that you do cry and you do release it, because it is painful and it's something that's sad and that has hurt you. Whatever the grief situation may be in your life. So be sure to cry. The next one is acknowledging and accepting the pain. Grief comes with pain. It's painful to lose significant things to you, whether that's the relationship between your parents, a place that you used to live, an important job, your relationship with your partner. Maybe you had a miscarriage. Whatever the case may be, maybe someone died. Whatever the case may be, accept it, acknowledge that it hurts, and do, one of these other steps, one of these other coping skills to kind of move forward through it. But we have to accept what we've been through. We can't deny it and act like it didn't happen, because when we do that, we're not keeping it 100 with ourselves. We're not being true with ourselves. And it usually makes the grieving process a lot more difficult and a lot harder, and can lead to other things like high anxiety or depression. And of course, I'm just going to reiterate this point, get help, get some professional support. There's tons of social workers. There's even bereavement groups. That's what they're called, where there's a group set up, and these are in most major cities, where whenever you're going through some point of grief, they have groups that you can go to. A lot of these are free too. You just Google bereavement groups and put in your location, and you should be able to find where you can go and, get things off your chest and have someone who's a professional who deals with grief, kind of help out and hear other people's stories and how they're getting through as well. And these are all over the place. So, get some pro help. It doesn't have to be an actual therapist, and you don't have to get insurance involved or pay someone's, therapy fee, but just figure out a way to get some support. There's tons of grief groups. There's tons of bereavement groups out there to help, but be sure that you do some proactive things to get the help instead of just the reactive things to get the help. Because, the more and more you prepare for these things, the less likely you'll fall into some serious anxiety and depression. We're all going to go through grief. Some of you may be grieving right now listening to this podcast, and I hope that I was able to provide something to help you through and help give you some ideas on what to do with it. And some of you may know other people that might be going through grief right now, and maybe you could pass along the podcast to them. So as I always say, be sure to share the podcast with someone you care about. If they are going through grief, or if they're not going through grief, be sure to do that. And if you like the podcast, check us out at The Woke Podcast on Twitter. Also at The Woke Podcast on Facebook. You can check us out at wokepodcast.com. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to share the podcast. If you have any questions, if you like any assistance with anything that you're going through, do not hesitate to hit me up. We are also on More Us app. That's Tariq Nasheed's new social media platform. We're on the More Us. And you can only get on More Us, though, if you have an iPhone. So for all my Android folks, I'm assuming the app is coming soon. I don't know when that is. I ain't running that. But for now, if you got an iPhone and you want to hit me up on More Us, please feel free to do so. Until next time, be sure to be constructive, be safe, be woke. We out. Peace.